We begin our deep dive into the Buccaneers 2022 draft class, where the Bucs addressed a lot of needs, got some potential steals, and had a few surprises. And we announced the winner of our jersey giveaway. Let's go.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to the Locked On Bucs Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And we thank you for making us your first listen or view of the day. I am James Yarcho, joined by my esteemed co-host, Mr. David Harrison. You can check out everything I'm doing over at BucsNation.com. Check out everything David is doing over at BucsGameDay.com, which was like 8,000 articles over the weekend. And, of course, you could follow along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, and at DHarrison82.
Yeah, we thank you again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen or your first view every single day. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Truthfully, James, most of my work was actually done with the Washington Commanders coverage that I do. Because I was there embedded with the team at the team facility over the weekend. But great coverage from you and Evan specifically for Locked On Bucs. And then, of course, a big shout out to Colin Halboom over at Bucs Game Day, who absolutely crushed the coverage. I mean, all the guys did. Logan Robinson was there at $1 with the team as well, and got to know Greg Auman from the text messages pretty well that we got. So great time was had by all, and the Buccaneers have some new players. On this episode, we're going to begin our recap and our deep dive into the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2022 NFL draft class. For those of you who don't remember it or didn't watch it because you have better things to do than sit and watch people get picked in the NFL draft, in round 2, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers selected defensive end Logan Hall and guard Luke Goedeke, which I was really happy that somebody asked him to pronounce his name for the record. Round 3, they went with my Arizona State Sun Devil running back Rachaad, the best pick of the entire class. We'll get there. Round 4, tight end Cade, Otton, and punter Jake Camarda. I didn't catch that pronunciation very well. Round 5, cornerback Zyon McCollum, another one of my favorites. Round 6, tight end Kieft. And round 7, edge Andre Anthony. But it all got started, James, with a trade. This is the story of a man who traded from number 27 and never got to pick in the first round again. So let's start there.
Again, until pick 32 in the 2023 draft. So the Buccaneers, they came on the clock and they move out of their spot. Right. The Jacksonville Jaguars wanted to come up and get somebody. That somebody, of course, ended up being, it was Devin Lloyd, the linebacker there out of Georgia. So in return, the Bucs only slid back to the first pick in the second round and also got picks number 106 and 180, which, David, you did the math of the ever famous Jimmy Johnson draft pick value chart, and it turned out to be a dead even trade. A lot of people were saying that Jason Licht got away with fleecing the Jacksonville Jaguars for only sliding back those 6 spots and picking up 2 more picks. One of them was to start round 4. The other one was a pick at, where did 180 fall? I think that fell in was that the 6th round?
I believe that was 6th round, yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to do math in my head right now, and I'm still exhausted. It's difficult. So, yeah, they didn't like the way the board fell to them, even though Devontae Wyatt was sitting right there. Slide back, pick up a couple of extra picks, and Jason Licht went to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great trade. You know, again, if you don't have the first round valuation on those players or high enough valuation to feel comfortable pulling the trigger number 27, then it's a really good trade. You start off day 2, so you literally have all night to really kind of him and haw over who you want to pick or receive other draft trade calls from other GMs to potentially trade back again. And you can feel really good starting off Friday night with that number 1 pick. And then you get into, again, and we've been talking about this, right, all offseason, is a very talent-heavy or a talent-rich middle part of this NFL draft. Like rounds 3 to 6 just had a lot of talent in there. There's going to be a lot of players in those rounds that contribute for teams in the 2022 NFL season. And so the Buccaneers were able to kind of get back into that dance a little bit more and potentially get some difference makers, including someone who hopefully we won't see very often, but when we do, we'll hopefully flip the field in favor of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, look, I was kind of one of them when this trade came through. I was like, wow, man, like the Jags really gave up a lot to go get Devin Lloyd. More power to him. But I think they signed like 2 free agent linebackers. I can't remember if it was you or somebody else we were talking about. Like they signed 2 free agent linebackers and then they go ahead and draft another one at 30 or at 27. Like they're going all out trying to find their off-ball linebacker of the future. More power to them for doing it. I like what the Buccaneers. I think both teams honestly can come away with this and say they like what they got out of this draft. So I don't know if anybody really fleeced anyone per se, but I think a good decision overall to do it. And look, for anybody surprised, Jason Licht already had kind of laid the groundwork, right? He said we may not have 30, first round grades on all these players. We may not have 25 first round grades on these players. And apparently, if they had first round grades on any of the players that a lot of us love, Devontae Wyatt, Lewis Cine, they weren't high enough first round grades. They were to warrant making that pick. And that's kind of the gamble that people make. A lot of people, James, wondering if Lewis Cine wasn't actually the target at number 33, but he gets taken at pick number 32. So if that was the plan, the Bucs kind of missed out on that gamble, but they end up with a pretty good player. Some other people probably missed out on some gambles this weekend too, James. And hopefully if they hit on their gambles, they did it with our friends over at betonline.net, who should be your number one source for all your sports betting stats and sports information with all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action going on at BetOnline, where the game starts. Segment 2 here, the Locked On Bucs podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen or your first view every single day. I just dropped the thing that I was playing with in my hands, so sorry about that. David Harrison, James Yarcho back after the long NFL draft weekend on Twitter at dharrison82 at jarcho_Bucs, a show at Locked On Bucs. James, we dropped our thoughts on the trade. Again, I think both of us pretty happy with what the Buccaneers were able to do. If they weren't going to take one of the players we targeted, we think they got good value in the trade. Coming into day 2, I wrote it up for Bucs Game Day, players that the Buccaneers could go ahead and select. I even did a mock draft, and I went D-line in my day 2 mock draft for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I absolutely nailed that when I went with Travis Jones, who was not the pick, but they did go D-line with Logan Hall.
Yeah, well, and I had done a players to watch out for on day 2, starting off the night, and I had put Logan Hall in that conversation, and I was trying to find it real quick, but Mike Kieft did a full second round mock draft over at bucksnation.com, and he did in fact put Logan Hall with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So he absolutely nailed it. Mike crushed it for Bucs Nation this weekend.
Yes.
Yeah, Logan Hall is an absolute beast, and I realized some people had him listed as kind of an edge rusher or a defensive end. Some places had listed him as a defensive tackle. It all kind of depended on the system. He's not going to be a stand-up guy, but he's a freak athlete, ridiculously strong, and can get offensive linemen off their spot pretty easily. And one of the things I kept referring to Dane Brugler's Beast Draft Guide over the course of draft weekend, because he did extensive write-ups on about 300 of these guys. And one of the things that he harped on is how strong Logan Hall is and how he comes with leverage when he comes out of his snap, and he comes up with all of his power to dislodge the offensive lineman right in front of him, to get them off their spot immediately, and then use his athleticism to get around them and be able to collapse the pocket or get after the quarterback. So I absolutely understand why the Buccaneers made this move. Ndamukong Suh or no Ndamukong Suh, Logan Hall is a guy who is going to be a force next to Vita for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, that question was brought up, obviously, when you have a draft pick like this, right? Again, not to overly plug our written work, but I wrote up kind of the thing about the questions that the Buccaneers could answer on night 1. And granted, they traded back, but honestly, trade back scenario was one of the questions they could answer. But you come into day 2, and some of those questions still exist because they didn't get answered on night 1, right? So one of those was the future of Ndamukong Suh. And if you take a defensive lineman, what does that mean for Suh? Well, they took a D lineman. So the team's already gone on record. This doesn't mean anything necessarily about Ndamukong Suh's future. And I think what's really important, we were kind of talking about this pre-recording, Logan Hall is much more of a player comp to Will Gholston. Granted, more athletic, probably more explosive Will Gholston than he is an Ndamukong Suh, cut. Whereas a Devontae Wyatt is more of an Ndamukong Suh type of player versus a Will Gholston. So if Devontae Wyatt was the pick, I would be less confident that the team feels like Ndamukong Suh is coming back. But because they went with more of a Will Gholston type, Will Gholston's been a very underrated part of this defense, but he's also getting a little bit long in the tooth and all those things. So they're going to need to probably replace him at a later point too. From an athletic standpoint, and going back to evaluations, Lance Zierlein of NFL.com noted that Logan Hall lined up as an interior D tackle with Houston, but projects better from an NFL standpoint as a 3-4 defensive end, which is perfect because that's exactly what the Buccaneers run and exactly what the Buccaneers are going to continue to do under head coach Todd Bowles, now promoted from defense coordinator. And James, I think that's exactly where he fits in on this Buccaneers defense, is lining up outside of Vita. Obviously, you mentioned more of a 3-tech type of body and composure coming from Logan Hall. I think in year one, if you can get Ndamukong Suh back, you see him as a rotational guy. You see him as an additional rusher that can come in. Maybe Ndamukong Suh comes off the field on some of these third downs, and you end up with Will Gholston and Logan on either end of Vita, or maybe they put all four. I mean, it really gives you just maximum flexibility for the defense, and I think that's going to create problems for these other NFC South teams to try to defend as they try to undercut the Buccaneers' division title hopes.
Yeah, and I think the ideal situation, right, is exactly what you just said. You still bring Ndamukong Suh back, probably on a 1-year deal, because that's what Suh has done in his tenure with the Buccaneers. It's been 1-year deal, 1-year deal, 1-year deal, and he's kind of playing that, for his own sake, right? He just wants to go year to year and make his decision. And if you can bring him back and give Logan Hall some time to develop, some time they can play around with him a little bit, right? They can line him up, along with Vita and Suh. They can line him up with Vita and Gholston. It gives them that flexibility. They can put all four of them out there once, and they can kind of see where he fits best and what they're going to do with him for the long term without having to rely on him, to be a plug and play starter. He can be a plug and play impact guy, but he doesn't necessarily have to carry the weight of being a full-time starter right out of the gate, same way they did with Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. So ultimately, it really does make a lot of sense in terms of what they can do with Logan Hall, what Logan Hall can do in the defense, and being able to kind of have another weapon to move around and cause problems for an opposing offense. We've seen them get these problem guys now. Granted, they've been back in the secondary with Logan Hall and Keanu Neal, guys that they can kind of shuffle around and move all over the place. It just adds another layer of deception to an already very intricate Todd Bowles defense that is going to give the Bucs defense an advantage on any given play.
Yeah, and look, and as we dive into this thing, I mean, it's always great when you and the team that you cover kind of see eye to eye. And again, I went with Travis Jones on the D line, but even in my write-up, I was like, honestly, this could go to either defensive lineman because both of them kind of fit what the Buccaneers want to do. We had defensive linemen ranked very highly in our team needs. Obviously, the Buccaneers did too. But let's look at some of these other players. I mean, Logan Hall is a developmental guy, right? He's not a plug-and-play day one starter you can just put out there for 100% of the defensive snaps every day. So there are some question marks about him, and the Buccaneers are going to have to tap into some of that potential. But there are other guys available. I mean, Christian Watson, one of my favorite guys in this class, North Dakota State wide receiver, goes pick 34 to the Green Bay Packers, which I hate seeing a guy that I like so much go to a team that I dislike so much more. But probably a good spot for Christian Watson to land. I mean, the Buccaneers didn't go wide receiver at all. So one of our top position needs for the Buccaneers, obviously they like Russell Gage and are more comfortable with Chris Godwin's recovery than we are, and especially much more than Booger McFarland is December. Yikes. Roger McCreary, a cornerback who had been tied to the Buccaneers a little bit on day two, was also still available. He ends up going Jalen Petrie, another one of my favorite names in this year's draft, a safety / cornerback hybrid, someone that we talked about. Arnold Ebiketie, the edge rusher out of Penn State. A lot of people, not Buccaneers people really, but a lot of other people, national guys, had edge as a potential target. Boye Mafe was another one. And then Andrew Booth, the cornerback out of Clemson, probably the best pure corner outside of Kaiir Elam that we've discussed for this team. All those guys still available. And some of those guys, you can look at them they almost look like Andrew Booth. He may come to this roster, James, and immediately compete to start opposite of Carlton Davis. So what do you think selecting Logan Hall, who, yes, Suh might still come back. Yes, Hall has some deficiencies he needs to clean up. What does that say about why the Buccaneers brought this guy onto the roster right now?
I think it was all about what they wanted as far as addressing the trenches. You know, we've talked numerous times over the course of the last 6 weeks about how the Buccaneers want to address the trenches on both sides of the football, and that they liked what Logan. It's something else that we've talked about numerous times is it's not about the individual, it's about the collective, right? So that told me that, yeah, they might have liked Lewis Cine. They might have liked Andrew Booth. They might have liked Roger McCreary, but they didn't like Perrion Winfrey later in the draft to pair with one of those secondary players. What they liked was Logan Hall, and then the talent that they can find on, later in day 2 or into day 3 to help bolster the secondary or the linebackers or tight end or whatever the case may be. So Logan Hall being the guy that they wanted to target there, that they were happy with getting to start round 2, just tells me they like his potential and his fit in Todd Bowles' defense more so than they would have liked a guy like an Andrew Booth.
Yeah, and I think that's very. And I honestly, you took the words right out of my mouth. Building from the trenches back. We've seen this Buccaneers team fall victim to a coaching staff that wanted to build a defense from the back forward. Not trying to hate on Lovey, move on, got it, but it is what it is. And honestly, we kind of see him doing the same thing in Houston. And I think when we talk about these pairings, right before the draft, one of our final episodes, we did our perfect pairings for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And obviously Logan Hall wasn't part of that because of the trade back and everything. But you look at what you just said, right? The Buccaneers take defensive lineman Logan Hall. There's about 3 or 4 or 5 defensive linemen that come off the board. I mean, Josh Pascal comes off the board. Fedarian Mathis goes to the Washington Commanders. He comes off the board. But then you go to the offensive line, right? So we talk about these perfect pairs. We're not going to dive into Goedeke too much on this, but we talk about those pairings. One interior offensive lineman, James, comes off the board between the Buccaneers pick at 33 and when they take Goedeke. And it was a true center. Cam Jurgens out of Nebraska goes to the Eagles. A true center. You don't need a true center. You got Ryan Jensen and you have a solid backup at Robert Haynes that you're developing behind him. You don't need Cam Jurgens. So guess what? If the Buccaneers are prioritizing interior offensive line with their next pick, literally none of their targets came off the board between pick 33 and pick 57. That is how you execute back-to-back picks as far as I'm concerned from a war room standpoint. Even if we don't necessarily agree with the position value pick necessarily, when you look at what the Buccaneers are doing, try to tie together why they were doing it, taking that D lineman early, waiting on the offensive lineman second. If they take the offensive lineman early, I mean, you take Goedeke at 33, you're reaching by 20-something picks, and Logan Hall is long gone by the time you get back on the clock. So then you're looking at, I don't know, the next D lineman off the board didn't even come off till the 3rd round. Maybe it was Travis Jones because, obviously I had him way overvalued than the NFL did.
I was the same way with Perrion Winfrey. We saw him go way late as well. But David, coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about what we would have done. We're going to announce the winner of our contest. But first, of course, you all know that summer is coming. And with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. You throw them in your bag, throw them in the kid's backpack, throw them in the cooler. You just make sure that everyone has a bar. And then that way, your summer adventures are fueled. The best part about Built Bars is they're not only healthy, but they are delicious. No more sacrificing taste for health. With Built Bars, you can have both, and it's easy. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order now. All Built Bars and Puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means that with Built Bar, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy doing it. So if you haven't tried the Built Puffs yet, you absolutely should, first and foremost. But you can get some incredible flavors like banana cream pie and cinnamon churro. They're only 140 calories. If that's not enough flavor for you, you can go with a mixed box. You can get a variety of the 12 different flavors between the OGs and the Puffs. Most of the Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15. You're going to get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Wrap Wrapping things up here on a Monday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. James Yarcho, David Harrison on Twitter at @JYarcho_Bucs, at DHarrison82, the show at Locked On Bucs. David, we've talked about some of the options that the Buccaneers had after the trade out of 27 to 33. They had their pick of basically all but 32 players, right? And even Josina Anderson had reported that the Bucs had turned down offers for that spot. Maybe it was somebody trying to come up and get a quarterback. Maybe it was somebody moving up to try to jump the Packers and try to get a wide receiver, whatever it was. The Bucs liked where they were. They liked Logan Hall. They wanted to take him. But heading into that night, I was talking about what my preference would be. And honestly, Twitter was so insane. Full disclosure, I didn't see if you had tweeted out what you thought the Buccaneers should have done at pick number 33. So let's go ahead and get into it. David, what would you have done with that 33rd pick?
I would have definitely pursued a trade back. I don't know, like you mentioned, I mean, you're the one who showed me the Josina Anderson tweet saying that the Buccaneers had received at least one trade offer. I have to believe they received way more than one trade offer, but maybe they were actually going down the rabbit hole with one team to potentially work out a deal, and it just fell apart. I don't know what that deal is, you know what I mean, or what the offer was, so I can't necessarily say I would have taken that offer per se, but I think if I'm the Buccaneers, I would have went ahead and entertained a trade down, but not too far down, like, go from 33 to maybe 40, and the way these things play out, let's say the team that you're trading with trades up to go after Logan Hall. You're still looking at Andrew Booth was still probably going to be available. John Mechie III. I know they didn't go wide receiver, but John Mechie III may be a talented enough guy to convince him. Josh Pascal, a defensive end out of Kentucky. He's a guy that could come in and help this defensive line as well from a rotational position. Look, Fedarian Mathis. Fedarian Mathis is probably going to be an interior defensive lineman for the Washington Commanders, could play that Ndamukong Suh role in a Buccaneers defense. So if you trade down like 40, 45, you gain yourself another mid-level or a mid-round pick. Maybe you gain yourself a mid-round pick next year and kind of start to stockpile that a little bit. You still come away with a rotational defensive line piece if that's really what you're after, but you get a little bit more draft capital. Probably don't get Logan Hall. And I don't want to, I'm not like trying to shade the Logan Hall selection. I do like the selection, but I think me personally, I'd probably trade back, get more draft capital, still get myself a defensive line prospect that is going to be able to contribute today and then develop into a starter.
Yeah, I agree, or not. I understand completely. I don't agree. I wouldn't have wanted to trade back unless it was for maybe like 2 or 3 spots. I wouldn't have wanted to drop out of the upper 30s. But I was very vocal on Twitter that I thought the best route for the Buccaneers to go would have been to either take Andrew Booth Jr. at number 33, or you had Nakobe Dean fall in your lap. Like, that was the story of the weekend was. Yeah. Outside of the quarterbacks, it was the fall of Nakobe Dean, and people kept citing, he has these health concerns and all this. Well, Ojabo got drafted with a ruptured Achilles before Nakobe Dean ever went off the board.
Ojabo let the medical professionals cut him open and repair his Achilles is the difference.
Yeah, well, and it was just like, at this stage, how can you pass on a top 15, maybe top 20 talent falling in your lap at 33, but they decided to go in a different direction. But I wanted to pair, same way we had talked about on our mock draft episode and leading up to the draft was, pair the secondary player with a Perion Winfrey, in the second round. Well, Perion Winfrey didn't go until number 108 to the Cleveland Browns. He might have had the most electric media conversation of all time, but obviously, I was way higher and you were way higher on Perion Winfrey than NFL teams were. But that was my thought process. And obviously, the Buccaneers felt the exact opposite, right? They addressed the trenches. They wanted to get the offensive and defensive line positions addressed first with some great talent. Then they shifted their focus to the secondary and to some more offensive weapons. Mm-hmm. But that's personally what I would have done. I have no qualms about Logan Hall being the pick at 33. It makes, as I said in the last segment, it makes a ton of sense. He's an athletic freak. He's, freakishly strong, all those things. So I absolutely understand it. I viewed it a different way, but that's why I'm on here talking about it and not in the draft room sitting in the middle of the room like I own the place. Apparently, Mike Florio with nothing better to do than to continue to whine and complain about the Buccaneers. It's comical at this point.
Yeah. I mean, why the nerve of a senior member executive of the Buccaneers staff whose literal main focus is the NFL draft and helping the organization make their picks. Why would he be sitting next to the head coach and the GM? That makes all the sense in the world. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that the point is, like, neither of us, we don't hate the pick by any means. We don't doubt the pick at all. It's just it's different strokes for different folks. It's basically what it boils down to. But the Buccaneers are going to do what they value in the organization, and we think that they did a good job. But how good of a job did they do, James? Our grade for Logan Hall. We're going to grade each and every pick, and then we'll come back at the end and we'll figure out our grade for the entire draft class. My grade for Logan Hall, despite everything that I just said, I'm going B+ because, and here's why I give it the plus, not just the B, because obviously it's a position in need. We talked about defensive line. You need people, even if you bring Gholston back, even if you bring Suh back, you're very shallow in depth. You need some help there. You go and do that. You get a guy that a lot of people had started to talk about back end of day one potential, status. So the fact that you trade back and you get him at the top of day two is obviously an upgrade. And then you go to the next level of this whole thing. At the NFL Scouting Combine, Jason Licht said they wanted to figure out a way to get better pass rush penetration from their defensive front. I think Logan Hall helps them do that in 2022. As a rookie, he helps them achieve that goal. And then you just get down 2, 3, 5 years down the road, and you have a guy who can potentially become a starter for your defense for the next 8 to 10 years. And this is where the plus comes in, James. I told you, I don't remember if it was off the air or on the air, to be honest with you, but I remember telling you I did not want the Buccaneers draft an off-ball linebacker because it basically officially solidified the end of Levante David. Like, his time was coming, and I know it's going to come eventually anyway. I want to delay it as long as I possibly can. So I'm super happy they passed on to Kobe Dean and no off-ball linebackers drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Levante David forever. Let's do this.
Real quick, I should have gotten clarification before we started recording. Are we grading just the pick, or because of the trade, do we include that in?
However, listen, I just gave them a plus because they didn't draft a linebacker to replace Levante David. However you want to evaluate and grade this assignment, Mr. Yarcho, go ahead and do it.
All right, then I will give them an A- because I will include the trade in this, and that trade continued to give the Buccaneers more flexibility throughout the rest of the weekend. We went through and we listed our top 3 positional needs to address in this draft. My number 1 was the defensive line, with or without Ndamukong Suh. So they get a really solid football player at my number 1 position of need, and they got extra picks in the process. That's an A- for me, man. It was spot on for the Buccaneers.
Look, I give B+, you give him an A-. It's not too far off. I definitely so a successful first overall pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but not just successful for the Buccaneers, James. It was also successful for a listener or viewer of the Locked On Bucs podcast.
Yeah, we do have our contest winner, and a shockingly few amount of people actually predicted Logan Hall. I would say far and away the most popular name that we got was Devontae Wyatt. Oh. Followed closely by Lewis Cine. We had a lot of people.
And Kaiir Elam. We had a lot of Kaiir Elams too.
We did have a lot of Kaiir Elams. I think the Lewis Cine thing was probably my fault because I really started to jump on that train for the last couple of days.
You weren't alone.
But yeah, only a couple of people submitted the name of Logan Hall, and our winner is Sean Lovegrove at Sean Lovegrove 1 on Twitter. So Sean, congratulations. Go ahead and send us a DM with your address and the jersey size. We just checked right before recording. The Buccaneers have not officially put that jersey up on the shop quite yet. As soon as it is up there, we will get that ordered and sent to you. And real quick, David, before we get out of here, I want to give a special shout out to a friend of ours. Real quick, before I get to that, Sean, also going to need the color choice. Are we doing white, red, or pewter for that jersey? But David, a good friend of ours, somebody that we have worked with for about 6 years now. Bailey Adams, friend of the show. He's been on the podcast. Want to give him a special shout out on this episode. Bailey left Bucs Nation. His last day was the final day of the draft, and he is now working over at pewterreport.com. So Scott Reynolds reached out to Bailey, recognized all of the talent and the hard work that we have seen from Bailey over the last 6 years, whether it was at the Pewter Plank or at Bucs Nation. I could not be more excited and more proud of my friend Bailey for this opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, Bailey is the guy like that. He's such a grinder. I mean, a lot of people, he doesn't come out with the overly voice. He's never gonna get mad about Bruce Arians sitting in the middle of the war room. Like, you know what I mean? But he's a cool, calm professional, very intelligent about the game of football, very confident in what he sees, and very well versed in writing and podcast. I mean, he's a podcaster as well, knows how to get the information out there, communication skills on par. I mean, look, Scott Reynolds, has had some really impressive hires over the years. Obviously, he and Mark Cook, may rest in peace, put together a very great product. Then Grizz, Matt Matera coming in there, Trevor Sikkema. I mean, Trevor, his star only continue. Like, people talk about 15 minutes of fame. Trevor Sikkema is going to have 15 decades of fame. But this is just one, another hire in a string of great hires by pewterreport.com. Scott Reynolds there. So congratulations to Bailey. Very, very well deserved. And congratulations to Scott Reynolds for getting one of the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's not just a great worker. He is a great person. And he worked hard and earned this success. And I can say very few people deserve it as much as Bailey does, because he really is one of the good ones. So we're going to have to make
flex on James that I got to have a drink in person with Bailey Adams before James did. So I still
that is true. But I'll turn around and flex that Bailey had dinner with me and my wife, not just me.
I mean, we technically had dinner together, kind of.
I'm just saying he got to meet my better half.
Listen, I'm a better Bailey Adams supporter than you are.
All I know is that come training camp, the three of us will get to go have a drink together for the very first time.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you again for making Locked On Bucs podcast your first listen or view of the day. Now make Locked On NFL your second listen. The schedule may be dark, but the NFL never stops, and neither does Locked On NFL. Get insights and opinions from hosts including Ross Jackson, Chris Carter, and Tony Wiggins, plus local Locked On NFL hosts repping all 32 squads. There is no offseason for real fans, so make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back tomorrow to continue our breakdown of the Buccaneers 2022 NFL draft class. Until then, if you have questions, topics, opinions that you want to share with us, you can shoot us an email over at lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail and be part of the show at 813-444-5841. For David Harrison, I am James Yarcho. Until we speak again, check out everything going on over at bucksnation.com and bucksgameday.com, and follow along on Twitter at LockedOnBucs, at JYarcho_Bucks, and at DHarrison82. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands, be good to one another, fire those cannons. We thank you so much for joining us right here at Locked On Bucs.